New York Giants OTA number 9 is in the books. So, what did we learn? I'll have that and more coming your way next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of our written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. We thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day, and of course, for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started. All right, Giant fans, on today's Locked On Giants podcast, we're going to talk about OTA number 9. It is in the books. It's amazing. Spring is just absolutely flying by, but the Giants were out on the field today for OTA number 9. Not as lively a practice as last Thursday when they had the little brawl breakout. Kind of an uneven practice, but I'm going to break all that down. We'll talk about the quarterbacks, the pass rush, and of course, all my takeaways. And I have a few thoughts that I'm going to share with you as we go along. So that is today's program. Again, welcome on into everybody. Let's get into it. All right. So the focus of today's practice was primarily red zone work. The Giants working both in the high red zone and the low red zone. So we didn't get a lot of opportunities to see like the really deep balls that Russell Wilson had been throwing so well and so far in the spring. But we did see, a lot of outside passes, slants, stuff to the flat, corners, fades, all kinds of stuff like that. And I want to talk specifically about quarterback 2. Okay, so we know Russell Wilson is going to be quarterback 1, and he had a pretty good day. He's been throwing the ball really well this spring, but let's talk about quarterback 2. And I found it interesting that for quarterback 2, the Giants actually had Jackson Dart, the rookie, and Jameis Winston share the reps for quarterback 2. Now, I want to talk about Dart first, and then I'll talk a little bit about Winston and what I think is happening here. Dart is basically having everything thrown at him, all right, including the kitchen sink. So what do I mean by that? Brian Daboll, if you go back a couple of years, I want to say it was, Brian Daboll with Daniel Jones did the same thing, basically threw all kinds of pressures and stunts and all kinds of, funky things to see how Daniel Jones would react when facing adversity. Jackson Dart, as expected, mixed results. All right. With the pass rush, he tends to bail out of the pocket quickly, all right, a little too quickly at times. Or he just runs and throws the ball off platform a little bit, off balance, and the ball doesn't get to where it needs to go. So it's almost like a sense of panic when I watch him now, being chased after by the pass rush. And the pass rush, which I'll talk about in the next segment, was pretty good today. But so that's one thing I've noticed with Jackson Dart. The other thing that I've noticed is he's developing a bit of a touch on those corner and fade routes, but some of those throws to the flat, he's just zipping them. And they're coming at the receiver so hot that they end up not reeling them in. So that's something that obviously needs to continue to work. He needs to work on. There were times during the practice when he held the ball a little too long, but that's to be expected. Again, this is only OTA number 9. Jackson Dart, he's not going to be ready for the start of week 1 to be the starter. I mean, anybody who thinks he might be the starter in week 1, I got news for you. It's just not going to happen. But again, what Daboll is doing is he's throwing everything, including the kitchen sink, at this young man to see how he responds to adversity. And we saw, some twists and some stunts, like I said, disguised coverage. So Jackson Dart's just looking at all this stuff. It's like a virtual reality game for him. And he's just trying to make sense of all that stuff. And he will. He definitely will. Um, right now, though, still kind of feeling his way around the offense. Now, what I found particularly interesting is that he has been taking all the reps, with the exception of one, and I think it was the 7-on-7 rep. He's been taking all his reps of late with the twos, where Jameis Winston is supposed to be. Jameis Winston is supposed to be the backup quarterback, QB2. And I think the reason for that is that ultimately the Giants are going to want to move Jackson Dart into that QB2 spot. I've mentioned this before, that right now, the way the depth chart kind of stacks up, Dart would be QB3, which would be the emergency quarterback, because I just don't see the Giants activating all three quarterbacks. All right. So if he's quarterback 3, he's not playing unless Wilson and Winston can't go. So they're getting him some reps, because ultimately what's going to happen, and probably by next year for sure, Dart will be QB1, Winston will be QB2. So they're kind of getting this kid a lot of reps. And not just with, like I said, guys that he's not going to be throwing to come later this season or next season. He's getting work with guys that are probably going to be on this team moving forward. And again, he hasn't looked that bad. There's been some rough spots. I'm not going to lie. I think he threw one interception. I know he was sacked, and I use that term in quotes, sacked, because there's no contact. He was sacked a couple of times because he held the ball too long. And oh, by the way, another thing that they've been doing is every time Jackson Dart has been out there, you see the defensive line, especially the front seven, waving their hands. And they're trying to distract the kid, putting up their hands, trying to make him throw through the trees, so to speak. So, it's interesting because Brian Dable won't talk about what exactly the plan is for Jackson Dart. But I think if you kind of pay attention to what goes on in practice, you can kind of see what he's trying to do. And I didn't get a chance to ask Dable today how Dart was coming with that, because unfortunately I got stuck in traffic, so I missed Dable. I did make it in time for practice, but I didn't get to ask Dable. I will next week. But the way the plan is unfolding is kind of interesting, because they're developing Dart, they're getting him reps. It's not going to be a case of, okay, we'll just shove him to the background and let him sit. So I do think at some point the goal is for him to get in there and play, whether it be in a mop-up role, whether it be down the line as a starter. We'll see how it plays out, but that's kind of where that is going to. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about the pass rush and what I saw with that. So don't go anywhere. We'll have that for you right after this. Hey, Giant fans, say goodbye to sticky notes, scribble plans on the fridge, and overlapping calendar invites. The Skylight calendar is here to bring clarity to the chaos and help families stay organized without the stress. The sleek digital display syncs with your existing calendars, Google, Apple, Outlook, and more, making it so simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, and reminders all in one easy-to-see place. Look, in my line of work, things frequently pop up on my calendar, and quite often things change due to breaking news and other factors that are common in my job. And ever since I got this Skylight calendar, which we have in a central location in our home, there are no more questions about what my schedule is, because I can update everything on the fly and have it available so that everyone is on the same page. So if you're looking to bring some organization to your household's busy schedule, give Skylight a try. And right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars when you go to skylightcal.com/NFL. Again, that's SKYLIGHTCAL.com/NFL for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Trainer. We're talking OTA number 9. It is in the books. The Giants have one more OTA, and that is on Friday. The media is not in the building for that. And then next week on Tuesday and Wednesday, the media is in the building for the mandatory mini camp. We'll have a preview of that. We'll also talk about a wrap up. We'll have a wrap up show. Brandon Olson's going to join me next week at some point. We'll probably wrap everything up. And I'm hoping to have Ed Valentine on before the mandatory minicamp to talk about what we've kind of learned so far from the OTAs. So that's where we're at as far as programming for next week. Hope you will join us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. All right, let's talk now about the pass rush. All right, now today, Kayvon Thibodeau did not practice. It was basically Brian Burns, Chauncey Golston, and Abdul Carter. The first thing that kind of jumped out at me is how fast these guys are. I mean, my goodness, as soon as the ball is snapped, it's almost like they know the snap count because they were in the backfield harassing the quarterbacks, whether it was Dart, whether it was Wilson, whether it was Winston, whether it was Tommy DeVito. That pass rush is fast, very fast. And, it's interesting when I tweeted that out during practice, I had somebody say to me, that can't be good for the offensive line. Folks, remember something again. It's non-contact, no pads. So the offensive lineman can't really get into their blocks. The advantage is on the defensive side of the ball. So I suspect it's going to fall somewhere in the middle, the truth, as to how fast this pass rush is. But it is a fast pass rush. I mean, Abdul Carter in particular, my gosh, as soon as the ball was snapped, boom, he was in the backfield, whether he was lined up wide, whether he was lined up at the 4-eye, whether he was lined up at middle linebacker. Abdul Carter was in that backfield before you could say boo. And speaking of Abdul Carter, he had a couple of pressures, a couple of sacks that I saw. That kid was moved all over the place. So you figure once Thibodeau comes back, once Dexter Lawrence comes back, you've got Golston, Lawrence, Thibodeau, Burns, Carter. Good luck, opponents. Good luck blocking that group because Shane Bowen has been, experimenting with some different looks. And obviously, Dexter Lawrence hasn't been able to practice. They've held him out. But there's going to be opportunities to get them all on the field. And my gosh, it's going to be absolutely sick when they all get on the field together. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. Now, I mentioned in the last segment how whenever Jackson Dart was on the field, the defensive front were getting their hands up into the passing lanes. They were kind of waving. That was actually something that they were doing a lot more of today. I saw that on a lot of times, especially when there was a deeper drop back by the quarterback. The defensive linemen were getting their hands up into the passing lane. And I'm glad to see that because all too often when a defensive lineman gets blocked, he instead of getting his hands up, he's just, trying to disengage and use his hands to get off the block. And if you're stonewalled like that, then get your hands up. And as a result, there were a lot of batted passes at the line, at the point of attack. And that was good to see. So I like what they're kind of doing with this pass rush, with the versatility, with moving them around, with bringing pressure. You don't know where the pressure is. I thought some of the disguises were pretty interesting where, I'm watching and from what I could see, and granted they were all the way on the other half of the field, but when they were coming at us, I could see twists, I could see stunts, I could see disguises where you thought this guy was going to drop in the coverage and instead he came at it. So you're starting to see some creative stuff. Now, remember, the springtime is basically to experiment. It doesn't mean that what we're seeing now is going to make it into the final playbook. But there are some intriguing things going on with the defense and the defensive alignments that Shane Bowen, the defensive coordinator, is trying to orchestrate. So I'm kind of excited about that. Okay. Speaking of the pass rush and the pass defense, let's talk about the back end of the defense. Now, what was an interesting development was a cornerback. So at cornerback 2, because cornerback 1 is Paulson Adebo, you actually had Deontay Banks and Cordell Flott sharing reps at cornerback 2. And I found that interesting because it's not as though Banks was injured or limited or anything like that because he got a lot of reps with the second team defense. But I like that move because, look, Banks, he had a rough year last year. And although he's been working at it, the reviews from everybody we asked, including Paulson Adebo, who we spoke to today, the reviews have been positive. Great. But you can't just hand a guy a starting job because he's on scholarship. And I like that about how the Giants are approaching camp. Make these guys earn it. And, in the past, I don't think they've done that enough. Certain guys have just walked right in and gotten, the starting job, and regardless of how they played the year prior. And I don't think that's the way to go. So nice to see that they're doing everything possible to light a fire under Deontay Banks's tush and get him to where he can play at a high enough level. Now, I do think that Banks will emerge as a starter. Flott, they tried to plug him in as a starter last year, and that did not work out. So they're giving him an opportunity to compete. And look, what's that old saying? Iron sharpens iron. Competition never hurt anybody. So I'm interested to see how that plays out, and if Deontay Banks, especially once the pads go on and once they're allowed to hit the receivers, jam the receivers at the coming off the line. I'm curious to see how Deontay Banks handles all that because it was just stuff in his game that he just did not do very well last year. So that's a competition, if you will, that's kind of developing late here in the spring, and we'll see if that competition continues. All right. Coming up next, I've got a few more observations from OTA number 9. So we'll talk about those right after this. Hey, Giant fans, the NBA Finals are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't miss moments. Whether it's a game winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip off and live. Got a hunch about who wins, the MVP, the top scorer? Why not explore all that and more where you can win big on such player props, performance trends, and same game parlays? Just think your first $5 winning bet can yield you $200 in bonus bets to add to your excitement. So if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to fanduel.com and place your first $5 bet. If you win, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and I'm recapping my takeaways from OTA number 9. Now, we heard from Paulson Adebo, as I think I mentioned before. Tyrone Tracy also came to the podium, and Darius Slayton. And, a common topic with anybody on offense really has been the quarterbacks and the quarterback room. And everybody's basically saying the same about the energy. And, listening to the different receivers and different players on offense talk about the quarterback, especially those who were here last year, it's almost like they've had their eyes open and they're like, wow, better communication, better energy, better everything. So I don't know if it's just the newness or the honeymoon period or whatnot, but very positive feedback coming out of the offensive side of the ball regarding the 3 new quarterbacks that the Giants brought in. And by the way, Slayton told a funny story about Jameis Winston and how, he could be talking about something and then all of a sudden the conversation shifts. He was saying, yeah, we can talk about a slant. And now all of a sudden he brings up Kentucky Fried Chicken. So Jameis Winston, he is definitely on my list of guys that I want to talk to this summer. I mean, he seems just absolutely quote worthy, if you will. And I think also, besides the fact that he's probably quote worthy, very intelligent. And I'm sure, there's a lot to be learned from his experience as an NFL quarterback. So that's definitely on my to-do list this summer when we get to training camp. But anyway, Tyrone Tracy was interesting because he came to the podium and I asked him about, what have you been working on? What do you want to improve and so forth? And I'm going to play for you the clip of that exchange because I was glad to hear him go there because if he hadn't gone there, I would have. So here's the clip from that exchange. Tyron, what about your game? When you look back on last year, what did you see and what did you say to yourself this year? I got to get this better.
Yeah, really, obviously ball security was like a huge thing for me last year. I had too many on the ground, so that was a big thing for me. But then also just being more vocal, being a leader, making sure that I'm coming out here doing the right thing all the time. And whenever I'm asked to make a play, I make that play. I think consistency is the best thing that shows up in the NFL. When you look at all the great running backs, they're very consistent year after year after year. So that's what I want to be. I want to be one of the great New York Giant running backs that's coming through here. But it starts with consistency. So, and that's going to start at practice every day.
What are you doing for ball security? Are you walking around with the ball around the facility, having people kind of poke it out? What exactly? How have you been addressing that?
Yeah, first of all, it starts on the football field. Every time I'm holding the ball or I get the ball, whatever it is, make sure I'm carrying it the right way. And then I also bought, I don't know if y'all know what it is, but like a little strength, it's a grip strengthener off Amazon that I use every night. It just helps me. It just makes sure that like I'm being fundamentally sound when I'm holding the ball as well. So again, just taking, your coaching in the meeting room to the field. All
right, so Tracy fully aware that putting the ball on the ground is not acceptable. He's been working on it. I was kind of hoping he would say that he was walking around the facility with the ball in his hand, kind of like how Tiki Barber did it back in the day. Tiki took that ball with him everywhere, and he instructed the staff to try and poke it out when he was least expecting it. And he worked on his grip, and of course, Tiki got rid of the fumbling problem that plagued him early in his career. So Tracy hasn't quite done that from what he was saying, but at least he's working on improving his grip and just holding on to the ball. Because look, the most alarming thing about his game last year is that considering he was a former receiver in college, he had drops. I think he had something like 5 drop passes. So I was glad to hear that he's working on that because look, they're going to count on him. And hey, if you're going to put the ball on the ground, you're going to be on the bench. You can mark that in stone. All right. Offensive line, let's talk about that. For today's offensive line, Greg Van Roten did not partake in any of the team drills. Could be just a workload management. I don't think there was anything injury related, which, by the way, I know some people saw the list of players who didn't practice. Not all of that is injury related. It could be workload management. It could be just the Giants trying to get a look at some of these guys, these other guys behind them. So I would not put too much stock in the attendance reports that you see coming out of these practices. But with the offensive line, it was interesting. Evan Neal had gotten some reps. The last OTA we were in, he got some reps with the first team offensive line. Didn't get any that I saw with the first team offensive line this time around. It was John Runyon Jr. returning and playing left guard with the ones, and over playing right guard with the ones. Jay Kubas. All right, not Evan Neal, Jay Kubas. Now, why is that significant? Well, Evan Neal with the twos was working at left guard, and it just seems like every practice that we, the media, have been in, Evan Neal has been at left guard, not right guard, left guard. And it just seems like that's the direction they're going in with him. Now, next week, the Giants assistant coaches are due to speak at the mandatory minicamp. I am going to make some inquiries about the thinking behind that. So that's coming up. I promise you that's on my list of things to do. But it looks like, and I mentioned this before on the show. I've mentioned, wondering if perhaps the Giants want to ultimately move Evan Neal in at left guard, move Runyon over to right guard, and have Van Roten serve as like the swing guard / center. So that's something to keep an eye on, especially once we get into training camp, if that's how they're thinking of going. And I'll see if I can get an answer out of Carmen Priscillo about that, but I have a feeling he's not going to be able to say for sure if that's indeed the plan. So we might have to just kind of keep an eye on that. All right, some other things. The Jalen Hyatt, Russell Wilson connection, very nice. Very nice. I mean, those two they're like in mid-season form. And I'm really happy to see Jalen Hyatt getting those opportunities and taking advantage of them. Because look, this is make or break for him. If he does not step up, if he does not deliver the goods, he's not going to be on this team much longer. He is taking advantage of it, taking those reps that otherwise would have gone to Malik Neighbors, who is still coming along with that toe issue that he had. He's expected to be fine, but I'm just well, that's another topic. I'll get to that in a moment. But the fact that Jalen Hyatt has been able to take advantage of his opportunities, that's a positive. Now, an interesting matchup, if you will, or not matchup, but a match. Jameis Winston and Amir Smith Marset. I noticed that he threw to him a lot. And the connection there was pretty good. And the reason why I bring that up is because Amir Smith Marset, who is the return specialist for the Giants, I remember talking to him last year, and he said to me, I want to be more than just a return specialist. I want to have a chance to contribute to the offense. So he's getting his opportunity. He hasn't gotten it really with the ones, but he's getting it with the twos, and he's looked good doing it, I might add. So good to see that for sure. All right, I kind of touched on it before about Malik Neighbors and the toe. Brian Dable said, he's coming along. That's kind of interesting. I've talked about this before. I don't anticipate seeing Malik Neighbors at all this spring. And whenever a guy is sitting out like that, I wonder if there was a setback or if there was a concern. I mean, they talked about resting him, but the season ended in early January, and he had how many weeks, how many months to rest it? So you just wonder if maybe early on something happened. I'm not saying it did. I don't know that for a fact, but it's been a head scratcher. But look, better be safe than sorry with him because he's one of your most valuable players on offense. Speaking of guys who were sidelined, Cam Scatterboo was not on the field. Now, I initially thought, okay, does it have to do with the fact that he doesn't have a signed contract? And, because there's this rule that unless you sign a waiver, an injury protection waiver, you cannot go out and participate in OTAs and mini camps and training camp unless you have signed that or you have a signed contract. So I thought for a brief moment that maybe that was the reason why Cam Scatterboo wasn't out there. But then I remembered he was out there before. So obviously that's not the issue. He probably does have a signed waiver, which can lead me to wonder if maybe he's nursing something. I don't know that for a fact. I'm just using deductive reasoning here. But if they're keeping him out of practice, and again, it's early, I get it. But with the rookies, you kind of like to see them out there. You like to see them get some work in. You don't want to see them sitting on the sideline. Darius Alexander's been sitting on the sideline, hasn't been able to get some work. This is valuable practice time. So that's just something that kind of caught my eye a little bit with regards to who was practicing and who wasn't. And again, normally I don't put much stock in it, but there are exceptions. And this was one exception that I definitely wanted to mention to you. Okay, the other thing that I want to mention, and this goes to show you how active, how much of a leader Russell Wilson has been. The Giants have changed up practice a little bit to incorporate more 7-on-7s. That at the suggestion of Russell Wilson. Head coach Brian Dable talked about that. He said Russell Wilson suggested it. He talked about the benefits of it for him. You go back to last year, the Giants weren't doing a lot of 7-on-7s because, quite honestly, to the casual observer, they can be a little, they're almost like a waste because there's no pass rush. There's no, you're limited. You basically you're seeing the second level and beyond develop, and you're not challenged by the stuff up front. And last year, the Giants put a little bit more emphasis on the team drills, the 11-on-11, than the 7-on-7s. That's not the case right now. So that's a little change that Brian Dable made to the practices this year. And look, every little bit helps. I I fully endorse it if it's going to help them. And of course, it could also help the defensive secondary. It could help the wide receivers and the tight ends. I say go for it. And I think it's going to be, it's going to benefit them. Um, the other thing I want to talk about real quick, the fact that there's been like a lot of guys that have not been practicing, this has given the coaching staff an opportunity to look at some of these younger guys. And this is important because you get to training camp and you've got to strike a balance between evaluating the younger guys who are trying to make the roster and also getting your starters ready. I don't have to tell you guys and gals that the Giants coming out of training camp have looked sluggish for like the first 2-3 weeks. They can't have that. They cannot get off to a slow start with 2 division games coming up in weeks 1 and 2. So I almost get the impression, I'm curious to see how this plays out in summer, that, okay, let's sit these guys down. We know what Dexter Lawrence can do. We know what Bobby Okereke could do. We know what Kayvon Thibodeau could do, or this guy could do. Let's get some of these other younger guys in there so that we can start to get a feel for what they can do. And those guys will, of course, get opportunities in the preseason games. They'll probably take on the bulk of the snaps in the games, but as opposed to maybe a bulk of the practice reps. So I think that's another little shift that the Giants have done with setting up practices this year. And we'll see if that continues into training camp. And then finally, Brian Daboll confirming that they are going to do joint practices with the Jets and only the Jets this year. It's going to be one at East Rutherford, one at Florham Park. I don't have the dates yet, but I'll try and get those for you. I don't know if they've been set, but I'll see if I can't get those for you for a future show or whatnot. So, all right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. As always, thank you so much for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day, or if you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Don't forget, check out Locked On NFL Scouting with host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino. They will bring you up to date on all things NFL ahead of training camps, which will be here before we know it. Giants will open up training camp next month. I believe it's going to be late July. I don't have the exact date, but we'll probably get that next week and find out what the training camp schedule is going to be. And it's going to be a critical camp for the Giants. So we will have all that for you and more here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. And I'll see you next week, Giant fans. Have a great, great weekend.